Hi, I'm Ashley McElwain, licensed marriage and family therapist and founder and CEO of Foundation Restoration. Welcome to Foundation Restoration's Real Talk podcast, where you'll find real people discussing real issues while offering real help at the intersection of clinical expertise and a biblical perspective. We're so glad you've joined us. Welcome to this episode of the Real Talk podcast. So glad that you guys can join us. I've missed you. Once again, my apologies for the lack of new episodes. Real life. We had all of our year-end fundraising going on. Really, the big thing, our second annual Second Chance Prom, which was a huge success and so much fun. We nearly doubled in size. For those of you who don't know, that's an adult prom that we put on here in Raleigh as part of our fundraising, really just trying to help you all to experience our ministry firsthand and in a way for you to also then support our ministry and our mission. And it's so much fun. Everybody has a great time. We have a 360 video booth that we introduced this year. Super duper fun. People love that. Photo booth. We had our silent auction, our DJ, so some really great music, and it was just a lot of fun. But it's a big event, and that on top of just the fundraising and trying to get the money that our ministry needs, it's always a lot in addition to holidays, season, and trying to make the most of that. So here we are, the new year started, and still trying to catch up with everything and just keep up with the ministry and all that Foundation Restoration is doing. And so here it is, February. I don't know how that happened. And I'm just now recording podcast episode. Thanks for bearing with me as I juggle the realities of running a ministry and being a mom and trying to do all that professionally and personally is demanded of me. But I'm so glad to be back, and I'm really excited because I wanted to talk about the topic that I'm going to do. It's going to be a two-part series, and it actually comes out of one of the things I did in January that kind of occupied me was one of the large local churches here in Raleigh hosted a big conference on anxiety and really kind of trying to address and combat just the challenges that come with anxiety and providing that in a safe space with obviously the faith component as well. So that was super duper duper fun. Loved it. Had some amazing colleagues who were also speaking. Dr. Ed Welch was an incredible main speaker at the event and was really truly honored to speak at that event and super grateful to have the opportunity to meet some really great people and to discuss a really important topic. I know that in many episodes before, I've talked about wanting to discuss social media and the impact of social media on our mental health and our relational health and our spiritual health as well. And so this, I'm looking at it, the title of what I presented on and what I'll be talking about in this two-part series is Plugged In and Stressed Out: How Technology and Social Media Can Contribute to Anxiety. And it is in three different sections where we'll talk about just what anxiety is in general and kind of getting a little bit of that context in place. And then the other components will be how and why social media and technology contribute to our anxiety, and then looking at how we can kind of combat that and some remedies and antidotes to those factors that are involved. Speaking of anxiety, what's kind of ironic and funny is this is my second recording of this. I recorded the entire thing, felt really great about it, and then found out that for some reason the sound did not record. It was just video. So here I am giving this a second go, which is a little ironic as I'm speaking on anxiety and technology and how it can create anxiety. So as I'm recording this, hoping and praying that the second time around that the audio is working correctly. But such is life, trying to manage the expectations and realize that these things happen and They stink and it's not fun, but what do we do about it? And so I'm hoping that maybe the second time around I had forgotten something that I'll include that will be even more beneficial. So here you go. Um, we're going to jump in. Like I said, talking about being plugged in but also stressed out, and how technology and social media can contribute to anxiety, and looking again at specifically what anxiety is and kind of getting a good snapshot of what anxiety is, what it looks like, the prevalence of it, and some statistics around it. Also, then looking at how specifically technology and social media can contribute to anxiety, looking at the various factors involved with that. And then we'll be teasing out some antidotes and some ways that we can tackle preventing, overcoming, eliminating those factors that are stressing us out, that are worrying us, or that are contributing to our anxiety. So I'm really excited about it. I am going to kick off the podcast with a little story that I shared when I spoke at the conference. And that was that, I had decided that I was going to do a post, a social media post for foundation restoration. And I had this great idea and I worked on creating this beautiful graphic, and I thought, oh wow, this looks good. This is great information. People are going to love this. I was so proud of it. Worked hard, posted it, and bam, no likes. Okay, that's all right. Let's give it a little bit of time. The algorithms, maybe people didn't see it. No comments. More time. Okay. No response. Hmm. Okay, not what I was expecting. And so I did what anyone else would do. I liked my own post. Liked my own post just to get that ball rolling, let the social media algorithms know like, hey, somebody's interested in this post. But it never got the ball rolling. It that post, I was left with like, what on earth? Why did I even spend the time? What was the point of that? But don't worry, after some intense therapy at Foundation Restoration, of course, I recovered. Seriously though, social media, no matter who you are, what you do, we have expectations around it. We have desired outcomes from it. And there is something about what we put out, we expect to get something back. And social media is just one of those things, in addition to technology, that can certainly impact our anxiety, our mental health, our mood, our relationships. So let's dive in and let's kind of talk about that. First off, I just want to talk about what is anxiety. So, one definition of anxiety is that it is a state of apprehension, uncertainty, and fear resulting from the anticipation of a realistic or fantasized threatening event or situation, often impairing physical and psychological functioning. If we want to really kind of pare it down, simplify it, anxiety is really a fear. It's a it's a fear and an apprehension or anticipation of something bad happening or something negative. It's the fear of the what if. And it's something that all of us can really relate to. At the conference, I posed the question to both of the sessions. Um, how many of you have been impacted by anxiety directly or indirectly, which means by you or someone you know? And every single person raised their hand, because the reality is everybody has experienced anxiety, been impacted by anxiety from a lesser to greater degree at some point in their life. Everybody can relate to anxiety. I know when I showed up at the conference, my GPS, I knew where I was going, kind of, but my GPS took me a weird way. And I ended up being like in the back of the building, and all of the roads were blocked off, like private drive, private drive. I could not get into the parking lot to the church that I was speaking at. And my anxiety started growing because I saw my preparation time dwindling. And so I laughed because by the time I actually got into the parking lot, got my stuff out, got into the building. I was already an anxious mess, and I thought, okay, well, I'll use this anxiety that I'm feeling to fuel my my speeches today, to remind me that anxiety is a real struggle for people and anxiety is something real. So, as far as aside from, like, I'm sure, again, each of you listening can think of a time that you've been anxious and what that feels like. A lot of times it's not just a thought, it begins to manifest itself physiologically. So we may feel a queasiness or a nausea. We may feel the heart pumping harder, beating harder, a tightness in our chest. Sometimes it feels like the tension, our shoulders, our neck, everything. We may find our shoulders up at our ears. A lot of times, anxiety is physiological responses, and we can identify those before we even identify what it is that's going on. What's going on? Anxiety. But everybody can relate to it to some degree. But their anxiety disorders are technically the most common mental illness in the US, affecting 40 million adults, or 19.1% of the population ages 18 and older. Keep in mind, this is clinical anxiety. This is somebody comes in, for example, if you came to Foundation Restoration and you met the diagnostic criteria for an anxiety disorder, you would be included in this number. So keep in mind, this is not saying this 19.1% of the population, 40 million adults, is not speaking to anxiety in general. It's speaking to clinically significant anxiety, people who have actually received a clinical diagnosis for anxiety. And it's not uncommon for someone with an anxiety disorder to also suffer from depression, or vice versa. So, nearly one half of those diagnosed with depression are also diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So, there's a comorbidity there where a lot of times depression and anxiety kind of go hand in hand. Anxiety disorders affect 31.9%, so not quite double, but a significant increase of adolescents between the ages of 13 and 18 years old. And research shows that untreated teenagers with anxiety disorders are at a higher risk to perform poorly in school, to miss out on important social experiences, and to engage in substance abuse. Something to note is that as individuals, as humans, I think we all struggle to some degree with how to handle difficult things in our lives. And we try to find ways to cope. And a lot of times, the easiest or most accessible tools to cope are maladaptive, or they're negative. They're things that, like, are not actually healthy or positive ways for us to cope. But unfortunately, that's a lot of times where we go. And certainly with teenagers, these adolescents and teenagers, they are looking to an immediate as well. And a lot of times it's what their peers are saying, it's what they see, again, in social media, it's kind of what they see in movies, it's the culture around them that influences them and gives them the options if we as parents are not involved. And this is what I would encourage you with. Parents, lay the groundwork for your kids before they get in the season, that they can come to you, that they can talk to you, that you can handle what's on their heart, that you can handle their emotions, their big emotions, that you are able to cope with your own emotions to care for theirs, and that you will be selfless enough to allow their struggles to happen at inconvenient times. I laugh because my little guy's 7 years old. And I'm telling you, when he wants to have the big, meaningful conversations, they're always when I am on absolute empty. They're the end of the night. I am wanting him so desperately to go to sleep so that I can go clean up, prep for the day, get myself ready, and prepare and finally get to bed myself and get the rest that I need. But I've learned to put that all aside and sit and listen with him, because I want to lay the groundwork for when he's in these challenging seasons as a teen, as an adolescent, that he knows my mom loves me. And no matter what time it is, no matter how inconvenient it is, no matter how big or scary or emotional it is, she's there. She can handle it. She's safe. and I can go wrestle with these things. And so, parents, I cannot encourage you enough that this starts young, to invest in them and to give them the space and the ability to know that you are their safe place and they can come to you and they can wrestle with things so that they don't run to substance abuse, that they aren't going to their peers and getting maybe some misinformation, so that they don't isolate themselves, so that they don't go to these maladaptive coping mechanisms that are ultimately going to cause them damage. And that's true for adults as well. Like, you've got to get the help, you've got to go to the safe places to know who is the person that you can go to, whether it is a professional therapist or a pastor or a family member that has proven that they love you and that they're there for you. That's where you got to go to work some of this out and to face the anxiety. Anxiety is fear. And while everyone experiences anxiety at some level, the extreme levels are debilitating. They are suffocating. They can completely paralyze someone from being able to function normally. Something I want to say is that as a Christian, as a believer, suffering with anxiety does not mean that you do not have a good relationship with the Lord. And what I've seen in the mental health community, or when it comes to mental health and faith, is so often neck up is a sin issue, neck down is a medical issue, it's a physical issue. And I'm here to say that is just not true. Sin can impede and impair us in many ways, but mental health is a real thing. Our brain is an organ. And so much neuroscience has come out showing just the different neurochemicals and implications that we cannot anymore afford to say mental health issues are a sin issue. Sin may certainly be contributing to some of it, but sin can also significantly contribute to physical issues as well. But we don't say to somebody who has heart disease, you know what, you just need to pray your way out of that. And if you really trusted in the Lord, you wouldn't take that aspirin, you wouldn't take that heart medication. But yet we do that to people suffering with mental health illnesses. And that's just, it's an absolute failure, I think, as believers. And so if you're out there and you struggle with anxiety, I just want to encourage you that that does not mean you don't have a meaningful or real relationship with the Lord. It just means that that is your struggle. That is your suffering. You know, the Bible speaks of anxiety and fear 365 times in the Bible. And I don't think that's a coincidence because there's 365 days in a year. And God obviously knew that it was a normal part of humanity. It's part of our broken world dealing with fear and anxiety. So God is not ever saying you won't experience anxiety, worry, or fear. He's saying you will, and here's what you can do. He speaks to it, He comforts us. And so, what we have to do is be able to acknowledge that anxiety is real, and we can't just ignore it, and we can't just dismiss it. We do have to acknowledge it. We do have to address it. We have to cope with it. God didn't run from our emotions, He created them. He understands them, he addresses them, he speaks to them, he cares about them. And we also need to be able to understand, address, speak to, and care about them. We have to realize that anxiety is real and it takes more than a prayer and a scripture. A lot of times it takes practical steps to be able to address it. So we as Christians really have to acknowledge that this is a real struggle. It's not a lack of faith. It is not a lack of relationship with the Lord. It's a real struggle for people. And we have to take the shame component, which can compound the issue, and we have to take that component out. And we have to look at it and say, how can I tenderly care for this person like I would with other physical ailments or struggles that they deal with? So that's a little bit of context about just what anxiety is and some statistics around it. And so now we can kind of hop into the link between social media, technology, and anxiety. So at the conference that I spoke at, I posed this question to those who were there. And I would pose this to you. And so maybe after I ask this question, you can hit the pause button and kind of think about this before I launch into some of my information. But I would ask you, do you see any link between social media, technology, and anxiety? And if so, what. This can be for you personally, this can be overall culturally, this can be in your family, this can be with family members, friends. But do you see any links between those three things? Keep in mind, technology is not just social media. Technology is phones, it is computers, it is tablets, it's television. So keep that in mind when you're answering this question. And I would encourage you to go ahead and hit the pause button. Think through that. Think through that question before we move forward, before you listen to the next section of this podcast. Just thinking for yourself about those links between them and what you've personally seen or experienced. What I thought was very fascinating in the conference was a lot of people. I spoke, there were two sessions, and I asked this question to both groups. There were different groups that came to the two different sessions. And what I thought was interesting was how many people answered this with very similar responses. And I think that that speaks to the fact that people are becoming more and more aware that there is a strong correlation between social media, technology, and just our mental health in general, but certainly with anxiety. And people had a lot of great answers that coincided with a lot of the things that I'm about to share. So, one of the first things I would mention is just that there's overwhelming clinical evidence and research that links many mental health concerns to the increased use of social media and technology. We see a really strong link between smartphone usage and increased anxiety, but also depression, suicidality, bullying, eating disorders, sexual violence, loneliness, learning problems, deficits in creativity. So these are just some of the things that we're seeing as a result and as a link and a correlation between smartphone usage. Obviously, tablets, social media, there's a lot of things. There's no doubt about it. There's so many studies. And if you do a quick Google search, you'll see a lot of studies showing the link. Teens are spending nearly 5 hours a day on social media. 5 hours a day. Just on social media. That's not even just on their tablet or their computers for work, just social media. The mental outcomes of that, we're seeing 41% of teens with the highest social media use rate their overall mental health as poor or very poor. On average, people spend 3 hours and 15 minutes on their phone every single day. And I'll say this, I don't think that that's accurate. I'm going to give you a few other statistics. I think that's a conservative number. I think people are spending way more than that on their phones. And again, that's without computers. I know for me, I do a lot of computer work. And so, this is just 3 hours and 15 minutes on our phones each day. They estimate that individuals check their phones on average 58 times a day, which again, I think that is also a very conservative number. I think people are, as time goes on, we become more and more incessant about checking our phone with every alert, with did I get a text message? Is that an email? What was that alert? Did somebody like this? The notifications are just constant. Sometimes for the social aspects, sometimes for work aspects, sometimes for school. But I thought that this was really fascinating. One study showed that baby boomers spent an average amount of time on their screen time, 3 hours, 31 minutes. And the proportion of people who reported feeling addicted for this baby boomer group was 29%. Gen X, there's an average of 4 hours and 9 minutes of screen time daily, with 44% reporting that they feel addicted. Millennials, 4 hours and 36 minutes, with 48% reporting that they feel addicted. Gen Z, 6 hours and 5 minutes daily on their screens, with 56% reporting that they feel addicted. Every day, that's like a full-time job. 6 hours and 5 minutes that Gen Z, and 56% reporting that they feel addicted. A recent study found that on average, children get their first phone at age 12. That means, with these numbers, that the average American is expected to spend approximately 12 years of their life looking at their phone. 12 years. Imagine if somebody said to you, I can guarantee you 12 years to work on something, what you could accomplish in 12 years. I think about with this ministry, we're about to celebrate 15 years. 15 years. And I think about all of the time and the effort and energy that has gone into running this ministry for 15 years. And I'm like, 12 years, 12 years spent looking at a phone. What could we do with 12 years of our time, that precious time that we will never get back? You get one life, one chance. Clearly, we're spending a lot of time on our phones and on social media. So, how does this link to anxiety? What are some of the sources of anxiety when it comes to technology and media? I would say one of the first things, this was not mentioned. I was a little surprised. This was not mentioned in either of the sessions I spoke at with lots of people gave great answers, but this was not one of them. It's just the inundation of negative news and commentary. You can open up your Facebook or your Instagram or your TikTok or your news or turn on the TV, and you're going to see so many tragedies. You're going to see airplane crashes. You're going to see car accidents. You're going to see killings. You're going to see uh, shootings. There's so much negative news out there. All across the world, we are made aware of everything that's going on, all of the tragedies, all of the heartache, all of the pain, all of the starvation. And the reality is, we were not meant to know or be exposed to so many negative things. I think about personally, again, there's the recent plane crash in DC. There was the plane crash in Philadelphia. I just saw that, there was another plane incident in Seattle. And we see 50 different angles of these same crashes over and over and over and over. And that is a lot to take on and to take in and to process. We are not God. We were not meant to see and know and hear about so much tragedy and heartache and pain because we do not have the capacity to absorb it. So there is a lot of anxiety. And I would say this, as we see these things, it skews. If we're already fearful and we're already worried about what if, what could happen, what happens is that then you take all of this information and it starts validating the fears and the worries. So, speaking to the airplanes, I have a sister and a brother in law who are both airline pilots. And having lived through 9/11 and the tragedies of that, I remember, in school, they turned on the news station and watching that second plane hit the Twin Towers. And then I grew up in Pennsylvania, and the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania with the people who brought that down so it didn't destroy more, and being not far from DC, I already, have a lot of fears about airplanes and how they can be used in very destructive ways. But having a sister and brother-in-law that I already worry about as pilots, now I'm seeing all of these stories, and it can very much take the fear and the worries that are they okay, is something going to happen, and it starts to make those fears feel much bigger and more significant because all around me I'm hearing plane crash, plane issues, planes, 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 planes. And what happens is it starts giving us skewed data to support the fears and the anxieties and the worries in a way that can contribute to an exacerbated anxiety. We were not meant to witness, to hear about, to see so many negative things in so many places. Um, Constantly, we are exposed to images and videos and stories of things that are just heart wrenching. And God did not create us to be able to absorb that much heartache and pain. So that's one thing that can contribute to anxiety that's connected with our technology, with our social media. Secondly, we are just given overwhelming amounts of information. And a lot of times, this information is conflicting, it's contradictory, and everybody's got an opinion about everything. And it's a lot for us to process. I think about it like this. At our second chance prom, one of the things that we used for decoration were those little dainty twinkle lights. If you know what I'm talking about, they're the really, really fine, dainty, thin lights that they just add like this little elegance to it. Well, I think I had like 12 to 18 strands of those little dainty twinkle lights. And my team and their spouses that were so kind to help us clean up after the prom. But somebody had gathered all of those and kind of balled them up and threw them in a bag. And it was so challenging trying to pull out these little fine threads and weave. They were all weaved together and they were crinkled, and it took me a very long time to untangle all of those twinkle lights. It was like a bird's nest. Um, Same thing if you've ever had like a real fine jewelry, like a necklace, and if you have a bunch of them and they get stuck together and all the knots and you're trying to untangle them. It was very similar to that. It's just this nest of all of these strands of light that I was stuck trying to pull apart piece by piece. And it took me forever trying to untangle it. And that's kind of what it's like to be online. And we get all of this information. A lot of it's conflicting, what's true, what's not true, AI generated, what's deep fake, what's just somebody's opinion. Are these facts? Are these information? Who hosted this research? There's just so much for us to try to make sense of that we weren't designed to do. And it's very conflicting and can cause anxiety. One mom at the conference had said that one of the challenges for her as a mom is they have their value system, they have their belief system, and that's what they have communicated to their children. But as their children have gotten older and have been exposed to social media and their apps and all of the things, a lot of what their kids are seeing on social media contradicts what they grew up believing. The mom was expressing how she feels like she's fighting a losing battle because these kids are just coming home with all of these dominant theories and information that contradict and conflict with what they've been taught at home. And, parents, I would say this: your kids are at home, and it is your job to limit what information they're getting from where, not because you are manipulating them, but because you're protecting them. And it's important for you to protect your belief system and your values and to encourage them to, while they dialogue and make sure that they understand what they believe and why they believe it and owning it and making it their own, that they have to be very cautious with just the inundation of information from people who just want them to believe something different. And so I would encourage you as parents to, one, to make sure that your kids understand why your belief system and value system is what it is, but also then to grapple with their questions and to have alternate information sources, but also to limit the falsified, the glamorized, the culturized, if that's a word, information that they're being inundated with from a lot of the social media outlets have a very strong biases. We're seeing, I mean, there's a lot of research coming out about this, obviously, and a lot of testimony about it. But the reality is, we do have to look and say, we need to contain the amount of information that we're getting, where we're getting it from, and making sure that it does align with our belief system, or that it is given in a way that we're able to explore and discuss without being beaten up by it. So we're just overwhelmed by information, opinions, conflicting, contradictory. It's very overwhelming. I know for me, one of the things that I did in college, and this kind of goes with the point one and point two of this, of just, I could not handle the the news. I remember in college just deciding, I this is not good for my mental health. It creates anxiety, it creates depression. I felt like I would be so discouraged when I would turn on the news, and so I decided to turn it off. And I still limit that. I don't watch the news on TV, and even on my social media, all of that. I'm very limited in my usage with it because I don't want to feed myself negativity and what somebody else thinks is news. I really have to protect and guard my mind and my heart. And so I would encourage you to do the same. But the reality is that anxiety can come from just the overwhelming amount of information that often conflicts and contradicts, and it's hard to decipher what's truth, what's not. what's legit, what's not, and then decide what we believe and why we believe that. Especially for young people, I think this is an extra added layer of anxiety because they're in the process of formulating that. The next point I would say is comparisons, just the feelings of inadequacy. Social media magnifies insecurities. And we have people who are presenting what they want us to see, what they want us to know. It is the highlight reel of their life. It is what they want you to think and to believe about their life and about who they are. We all do it. We post the goods, the good stuff, the highlights, the highs. And a lot of times it is an illusion and can be a delusion and completely falsified from the reality of their life. And the problem is, we get on there and we look around and we see, man, they look like they're perfect. They've got a great marriage. Oh man, their husband loves them so much. Oh, she's so gorgeous. Oh, they're always on vacation. They're doing so well. Oh, they have so many friends. They've got the perfect house. We look at this stuff and we see people's presentations, and we then start comparing ourselves and feeling inadequate. I equate it to the fact that we filter information through our insecurities, kind of like you take water, you pour it over coffee grounds that are in a filter, and out comes the cup of coffee. We take our life experiences, our insecurities, our worries, our doubts, our anxieties, those are the coffee grounds and the filter. And we take this information and what we see on social media, we filter through it. And what comes out a lot of times is the insecurity, the feelings of inadequacy, the depression, and we have to stop doing it. We have to realize that what we are comparing ourselves to is a falsified version, a glorified, glamorized version of what somebody wants us to think, what somebody wants us to see, what somebody wants us to believe, when in fact it's not reality. And we're comparing their idealized fantasy and illusion and presentation to our actual reality. And the the lack of glamour that comes with the reality. And again, we couple that with our insecurities, and it's just a recipe for disaster with anxiety. And I'll be honest with you, this was not really a big challenge for me until I became a mom. And when I became a mom, I really struggled with that transition. I was running a ministry that I absolutely loved and was passionate about and knew that God had called me to. It was growing, it was thriving, but it was also very demanding. And then you add in being a mom and really wanting to be a full time mom who was the best and who was intentional and who made the most of everything with my child. And knowing that he is my calling and he is my top priority and he is my ministry, and but feeling that I was called to both and knew that I was not released, and trying to juggle those two things, I really struggled tremendously with that, and wanting what I wanted to be with what I felt I could be. And so what I would do is if I looked on social media, I saw every other mom seemed to have it figured out, and they had the Pinterest worthy projects, and they had all the friends, and they were doing friend nights, and they were doing all the things, and it just seemed like they were achieving perfection while I was just the only one struggling. And it was very damaging, and I had to get off and realize this is not reality. This is a presentation. You know, I know myself, I laugh because I remember one time doing a post of my little corner where I have my blanket, my cozy blanket, my cup of coffee, my candle lit, my Bible, and I was talking about my Bible time. And I'm like, right. And on the other side of that was a couch covered in Toy Story toys, Buzz Lightyears, Woody, Jesse, Rex. The whole gang was there. I could barely sit on my couch. My living room looked like a bomb went off, Toy Story bomb went off in it. But that's not what anybody saw. And that's what I'm telling you is we we post our curated corners of our lives and we hide the mess. And the reality is everybody's life is messy and everybody has perfectly curated corners. But what we see are the perfectly curated corners, and we are comparing it to our mess. But that is not accurate. Everybody's got a mess. Everybody is dealing with their own things. I've seen people who post, my marriage is the best, my spouse is the greatest, and a month later they're divorced. So the reality is social media is not reality. And we're comparing ourselves, feeling inadequate to something that's just not real. Social media magnifies our insecurities. I'm going to pause there. We're going to pick up part 2, and we're going to continue to talk about some of these sources of anxiety connected to technology, social media, and just again how that impacts us, our mental health, our anxiety. And then we will also then go ahead and proceed with just the antidotes to that and what we can do to kind of protect, combat, attack, and overcome some of these challenges and to mitigate the negative impact that they have on our lives, on our relationships, on our mental health. So I hope you'll come back for part 2 of this podcast series. Well, friends, this concludes this episode of the Real Talk Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad you did. Remember, you were handcrafted by God, are dearly loved, and greatly needed in this world. We look forward to seeing you back here next time. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Real Talk. To stay connected, follow Foundation Restoration on Instagram and Facebook at FND Restoration, or visit us at www.foundationrestoration.org for more information. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to follow or subscribe and to leave us a 5-star review so more people can find our show. Foundation Restoration is a 501c3 nonprofit ministry that believes marriage is the heartbeat of society and exists to equip, strengthen, and restore marriages through clinical expertise and a biblical perspective. Please consider supporting our ministry with a tax-deductible donation at www.foundationrestoration.org. Your gift makes programs like this possible. Thank you for your generosity and partnership.